Welcome back. The pay gap is a massive bone of contention in South Africa, especially since we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. According to a report in 2013, CEOs of listed companies on the JSE were earning, on average, about 50 times the lowest paid workers. And considering benefits and incentives, the CEO of Shoprite, for example, earning more than 700 times. But a director's remuneration report released by Kukela this week suggests that at least that wage gap is not widening like it was before. CEO salary increases over the last 5 years were 5.8% on average, which is only slightly more than inflation. This relates to their guaranteed packages. As you can see, in 2012, there was almost no increase due to the poor economy. In 2013, union negotiated increases were much higher for workers, almost double inflation. Now, this trend comes from Kukela's database of the remuneration of directors for JSE-listed firms with an annual turnover of 250 million rand or more. To discuss, we're now joined by Laurence Grubb, the MD of Kukela. Thank you for joining us, Laurence. Isn't the big problem here that we're not looking at those bonuses and incentives? I mean, one of the richest men in this country, Koos Bekker, didn't take a guaranteed package.
There's always going to be those exceptions, like a Koos Bekker, who doesn't take guaranteed but gets significant remuneration from his shareholding in the organization. But we were looking at the rest of the executives or directors in charge of the 250 companies with more than 250 million revenue. And I think if you look at that wage gap, yes, it is obviously going to be increasing, because a small increase on a large amount of money is always going to be more than a small increase or a big increase on a small amount of money. So yes, that wage gap is increasing, but it's not increasing as fast. And I think, to me, the most important thing in South Africa is not so much the wage gap, it's more the unemployed. And I think your guest before from CIFSO was talking about the number of jobs that are going to be lost in the industry going forward, and already lost. And I think that's absolutely, to me, the most important thing is not so much the wage gap, but how do we get more people employed in the economy?
I agree. You're raising an important issue. The question again, though, if we look at incentives and bonuses, could we not possibly get a very different picture of where those salaries are going?
Yes, we did look at that. We capture all the information, including bonuses and cashed-in incentives. The bonuses for executives or CEOs over the last 2009 to 2012 were not that great. They picked up a little bit in 2013 and 14, but started declining again. So yes, there were bonuses that were realized, but much less than in the past, before 2008. So it does show a reflection of the change in the global and South African economy. On long-term incentives, it was even more interesting, because there we found out that only 15% of the executives or CEOs had actually been able to cash in anything out of their long-term incentives. And that must have been either because the performance criteria were not met. As you know, nowadays, most long-term incentives have to have a performance criteria involved. JSE companies and shareholders don't approve of that, of a long-term incentive without performance criteria. Or the schemes might have just been underwater because the share price is lower than the issue price.
Okay, so often linked to the market. I did look at a graph that you released showing short-term incentives in relation to long-term incentives. Correct. And it seems like there still is a focus on short-term incentives, which I thought would have decreased by now. Years ago, everybody was saying, you can't give short-term incentives because then CEOs can be reckless, do something that helps the company today, but not 10 years down the line. Is that not being addressed?
Francis, you're right in the sense that CEOs and executives should be focused more on the long-term, the sustainability of the business. But to do away with annual incentives completely is also not necessarily the right way to go, because you do need to still make sure that they focus on annual performance, because that's where your dividend flow comes from, etc. But what we try and do is we encourage clients to structure the remuneration for the CEOs and executives so that the majority of their pay or potential pay lies in the long-term incentive, the share scheme. because that then drives the longer term focus. But at the same time, you still need to have that annual bonus to make sure that they're not forgetting about the current year's performance.
Soon, I think we should look at how long CEOs last. But first, can we at least say from this initial finding that at least there is some sensitivity? So if the economy is in the dumps, if people are really struggling, at least there is some pullback on those bonuses, on remuneration.
Correct. I think that's something that is coming through more and more. I don't think we're there yet, and there's always going to be the rogue CEO or rogue executives who manage to get away with more than they should. But certainly, from what we've seen, is King 3 is having an impact. It does look as if boards are trying to implement King 3 in their organizations and take more ownership and responsibility and play a bit of governance role. And the link to performance is the most important thing. I don't think too many people would be worried about executives getting paid well. It's the case of, is it really linked to performance? If it's not linked to performance and they get paid well, that's the real problem.
Okay, let's look at the length of service. Less than 50, I think 42% of CEOs, we can see on the screen there, last for more than 5 years. What do you take out of that?
I think it's probably for a number of reasons. One is, most of the time when you get to the CEO's level, you've been in the organization a while, you're heading towards your retirement or a mature age anyway. As a CEO, you're normally earning a fair amount of money, so you probably can afford to retire. And there's no doubt that the stress at that level is very tough. I mean, when you're at the top, you're lonely, there's not a lot of other people around to support you, there's all kinds of pressures from the different stakeholders. So unless you're one of those very unique CEOs that are able to stand the test of time, most of the guys, I think, don't seem to last that long. So yeah, by far the majority, 58%, don't last more than 4 years or 5 years.
I guess it does make you think. The wage gap is a problem. I believe so, but I don't believe people at the top shouldn't be paid well, because your reputation at that level is also quite vulnerable. It can go with you. Look at a bridge collapse. A CEO is at the helm when a bridge collapses and 2 people are killed. So it's almost danger pay in a way. Do you have any opinion?
It is, yes, absolutely. I mean, a good example was the CEO of BHP Billiton. They had 5 fatalities in their organization. He lost 40% of his incentive through that, of his total pay, in fact. So, you know, that sort of thing can happen. And, you know, for a CEO of a massive organization like that, but you have to be held accountable. And I think it is appropriate that you are in some way, sort of penalized, if you want to call it that, for your organization's performance. So yes, the link to performance is the most important thing, and that's what we really need, is successful CEOs who can grow companies, employ more people, provide returns to shareholders. That's what we're really looking for.
All right, unfortunately we've run out of time. Thank you for explaining those findings very much. That was Laurence Grubb, MD of Khokela, and it seems like that brings us to the